Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome, Jonas, welcome, Joe. So today in this session, we're going to be discussing mostly why Bitcoin. In the past, we've discussed what blockchain is, what Bitcoin is. Today, we really would like to focus on the why. But I think before we get there, because I think there is one or two in the audience who did let me know that they haven't really heard much about Bitcoin. What this technology is all about, I would say it emerged from the want to have a monetary system where there is no central bank who can control it. That's kind of where it emerged from. And one of the properties of this type of technology and this cryptocurrency built on it is that we can now have ownership, legal ownership. Jonas, I know you don't like that, but ownership, digital ownership of an asset that no one can take away from us. So
I don't like it either.
Indeed, I know, but I say it for the non-legal individuals like myself to understand the difference that there is digital ownership and then there's legal.
Let us agree that we can exempt control over certain economic assets without the necessity of a centralized intermediary, which is, I think a fair description.
Indeed. Now, today we're going to discuss why Bitcoin, and this comes a lot with certain baggage from a community where a lot of people feel that they're what they call Bitcoin maxis, this group that believes no matter what, this is the solution. But that's an extremist view, which personally, I do quite subscribe to the view. But as academics, I would say we have to always question our views, no matter what we subscribe to. And with us, we have Joe, who is a heavy proponent of Bitcoin. And I would say on that note, let's get started. So Joe, you've heavily delved into this. Can you give us an overview, some history, why Bitcoin?
Let me introduce myself first to inform the audience where I'm coming from. My first degrees were from the Faculty of Arts. I've got degrees in history and literature, philosophy, Latin and Greek, apart, of course, from my master's from our truly excellent interdisciplinary department. So I will start by saying that my entire life, my values have been conditioned by the coming of age of the centralized state in the 19th century and the horrors it has perpetuated when it has reached its maturity in the 20th century. We start with the horrors of the Armenian and Greek genocides perpetuated by the Turkish state as it transformed from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic of today. Let us not forget that the Turkish Republic was an ally of Germany in the First World War and definitely informed the Holocaust of Hitler later on, then the fascist genocides and the equally abominable bloodshed of the communists in their various gulags. And I was born in 1975, right in the middle of the Cold War, with the risk of the attendant nuclear holocaust. So for me, throughout my life, I was both extremely frightened and horrified by the bloodshed, the decentralized state with all its strength that it can muster, the point at which it has perpetuated, and now it has reach the capacity to wipe out all human beings. So I start from there. So that's the first, that's my first premise. Now I will say this, Bitcoin is an inversion of history. I consider it to be the biggest paradigm shift in history, and I will explain why. History is a Greek word, historia, meaning investigation. Now investigation started with the emergence of writing as a technology. In other words, we're talking about data. The problem with data is that it has always been incredibly fragile. There are numerous attempts to make it more resilient, like the basalt columns of the Hammurabi Code, the Roman 12 tablets, and so on. But these can be easily destroyed and melted down. Things became worse, if you like, with the emergence of legal tender in Lydia in the 7th century BC, apparently under the king Croesus, who started stamping his image on discs, essentially commodities, metal coins. So you have what was a very serviceable form of money into legal tender and currency. Now, the problem is this: as the centralized state exerts more and more control, claiming control over truth. We're talking about records, and when we're talking about records, we're talking truth, whether they are laws, whether they are public registries, land registries, deeds, and the language of value itself, money. So they have to ensure that they limit the fragility of these records, because otherwise the central state will fall apart. To do that, they had to centralize further and further. With centralization comes the problem of abuse. So when you have all data in the hands of a central authority, from the pharaohs of Egypt to emperors or whoever they were, then you can start to corrupt data. When you corrupt the data, you are diluting property ownership. When you're diluting property ownership, the individual is at the mercy of the state. Now, then comes the Roman Republic. Now, I have a special interest in the Constitution and the law of the Roman Republic, especially as it developed into the civil code right up to Justinian. What is fascinating to me is that the Roman Republic tried to set up the only decentralized state in human history. Why? Because what the Romans faced was the problem of substituting the monarchy, the king, the central figure, with something else. Whom do we substitute the king? If it's not the rule of the king, then who will rule in Rome? And the answer was law. But there's a problem with that answer. Why? Because the rule of law is very well and good, but who makes law? If law is still easily amenable by rulers, then you don't have the rule of law. What you have is the caprice and whim of the ruler. People quote Cicero often, who said that servi legum sumus ut liberissimus, meaning we are servants of the law so that we may be free. They do not quote another very important definition of Cicero. What is true law? True law, vera quidem lex, est recta ratio, congruent naturae. True law is right reason, logic, if you like, congruent with nature. So Cicero is not making an arbitrary appeal to obeying law made at the whim of legislators in any way. He's setting up an absolute standard by which we may test that. States have tended against that, especially since the 17th century, when states started to concentrate all power into their hands through the inventions of gunpowder, steam engine, eventually central banking. Now, one of the vilest ways in which these centralized states steal and control individuals is through inflation. It is notable, for example, that during the period of the Roman Republic, there was no inflation. Coinage was completely pure. Why? Because the Roman Republic was so decentralized that trying to inflate Roman coinage was an incredibly difficult piece of work. You can call it proof of work. You had to have all the different branches of the state come together and agree. Now, the Roman Republic was set up for inertia, with vetoes at all levels. Again, imagine how difficult it is. Upon the Roman Republic becoming an empire, with an emperor, with everything under the sole discretion of the emperor. And it is interesting that the emperor was not a king as we know him, was simply someone who concentrated all the various branches of Roman constitutional power into his hands, which means that he no longer had to worry about the veto. Then suddenly, inflation started and erupted so badly that hyperinflation emerged to destroy the Roman Republic. We keep seeing hyperinflation for the rest of our 2,000-year history, significantly even on gold. People claim that gold is the hardest form of money and you cannot hyperinflate, and you can. And there have been numerous episodes. For example, in the 16th century, Spain discovered so much gold that they hyperinflated their economy and destroyed it. In the 13th century, I think, an extremely wealthy Muslim king took so much gold on his journey to Mecca that he hyperinflated the economies of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, and the region, and destroyed them for 10 years just by handing out gold. During the gold rushes of California and Australia and so on, you had so much production of gold in such a short period that you had hyperinflation. Now, with Bitcoin, we solve both the constitutional and the inflationary problem. One, because Bitcoin is a decentralized system that in which power cannot be controlled, but it is the network operating collectively, making the decisions as to how the network develops. And it is not the whim of any one party, but the amount of proof of work, energy that goes into the system that ensures it changes. So there's no way that you can coerce Bitcoin into the direction any single entity. Secondly,
if I may, sorry. No, that was an excellent historical trip because what is very important about Bitcoin is to remember why it came to be. And I think that Joe gave us numerous historical insights. I have a sweet spot for history as well, Joe, by the way. And you mentioned the Roman Empire. I come from the former Eastern Roman Empire. And I can tell you all kinds of horror stories about centralization and how emperors in the Eastern Roman part have mismanaged the finances of the state, which of course led to the ultimate demise. And I think these are very, very important points because I think so what you allowed us to understand is that we have experienced large periods of state centralization. In fact, many historians call the 20th century the century of totalitarianism, where different totalitarian ideologies have been competing. And we have, of course, witnessed that in the form of 2 world wars. And that is not completely unrelated to the Bitcoin discussion, to be honest, because this kind of concentration of power is also not only projected in terms of arms, weapons, and wars, but it's also projected in terms of economic policy. And of course, I believe that, Joshua, correct me if I'm wrong, that Bitcoin at the end of the day was a reaction to the centralization of the power to exercise economic policy in general. And by the way, Bitcoin is not the first time that digital societies have tried to remove that power from the state. For as long as computer networks became available, they were always trying to come up with such solutions. I can mention at least 2 examples. DigiCash in the 1980s. In fact, even Microsoft was interested in purchasing them and including them in Windows 1995, the best version of Windows, by the way, because that is the version that I was introduced with when I was a young child, which also says how old I am. And then, of course, I think that what came really close to what Bitcoin became today was Nick Szabo's idea on BitGold. So the idea that the power to create value and allow the performance of transactions without the necessary intervention of banks and governments has always been in the minds of digital communities. And because Joe raised the point of centralization, decentralization, I think that if we have learned anything from the history of the internet is that digital communities are not easy to control. They always have the way to devise their own universes. And the state will not always be in a position to exerting the necessary amount of control in order to keep them, so to speak, at bay. And I think Bitcoin validates that point. I think, Joshua, again, correct me if I'm wrong, as long as there are 2 or 3 computers willing to keep it going, it will be there. There is no way to stop it. There is no way to pull the plug and stop Bitcoin from happening. And even if Bitcoin goes to 0, another Bitcoin will emerge as long as there are programmers with access to the internet and computer coding software, right?
Indeed. And on that point, so if there's 1 or 2 computers that are still running, that's great because we can keep going. But if there's 1 or 2 computers that are running and they are home computers, commercial off-the-shelf computers, it means that it would be easier for people to try to attack the network. And this is in fact why Bitcoin. This is in fact why there's a lot of people are saying Bitcoin has become so large with tens of thousands of computers, where other blockchains out there do not have that number. So it's become harder to attack. So in fact, indeed, networks will keep going as long as there are computers behind there. And so far, Bitcoin is the only network of that size with that level of decentralization. Because remember, I'm a heavy proponent of there exists no full decentralization. In fact, if there are Bitcoin maxis, I can argue that there are points of centralization, even technical, but they're perfectly fine and we can live with them. But coming back, why should we even bother with Bitcoin?
I will amplify a bit on what John said, because John raised a very important point about the pursuit of war. Now, the thing is, and this is a fundamentally important property of Bitcoin, it's not just that it is scarce, which everybody is saying, it's finite. Now, this is an extraordinarily important property in the first place, because having a digital asset which is finite is unthinkable. It's like having wet water. So it's already a huge achievement in terms of computer science. But Cicero said, the sinews of war are infinite money. You can only perpetuate war through ever-growing amounts of money. Now, the central banks, the Bank of England, emerged to keep on funding war against France when England ran out of money, number one. The bloodshed of the 20th century was funded on fiat because before 1914, Europe was on the gold standard. When World War I, when the combating powers ran out of money in World War I, war did not stop. What did they do? They switched over to fiat. The great miracle of Hitler was achieved deceptively on a sort of sub-layer of fiat money. Now, fiat is the driver of war. When you have a scarce, very scarce and finite form of money, there is a limit to how far you can go. It is a solution to the problem of excessive abundance. So again, when you take a look at how big and dangerous states, centralized states and organizations become, if they can use some kind of infinite unit to incentivize people to keep working, then you will not stop. The abuses they can commit will not stop. On something as scarce and finite as Bitcoin, that changes. You run out of money. When you run out of money, your abuses have to stop.
That is a very, in fact, intriguing idea. I think, Joe, you mentioned excessive abundance. And I think that this is a key problem that characterizes more or less the efforts of economists to try to rationalize what we are doing in terms of how we behave vis-a-vis assets. In fact, I think the problem of abundance or lack thereof is what kickstarted the whole field of economics, which, by the way, is very important in order to understand why Bitcoin. And so I don't know whether you would like to take us to another trip from the classic economic theory all the way down to the other theories that have tried to solve the problem of economic, of asset abundance or lack thereof.
Unfortunately, it's a very big discussion, but I will briefly draw attention to the difference between the Keynesian and the Austrian schools. I hold the Keynesians to be responsible for the 20th century in the sense that they make the outrageous claim that human society should be organized according to the superior knowledge and goals of the state as catered for the economists and policy makers, and therefore social and economic policy is run through monetary policy. On the other hand, the Austrian economists reject that claim because they are aware of the problems that causes. Once you have Keynesians empower the centralized state, and at worst and at the best set up an economy which is unhealthily abundant. Remember, the two greatest challenges of societies of this kind are obesity and mental disease. Because abundance of meaningless food and entertainment leads to physical unhealth. The abundance of meaningless information leads to mental health. I remember at the beginning of the internet, we used to speculate, will a million monkeys at a million keyboards produce the complete works of Shakespeare? Well, we know now, it doesn't. So abundance is not healthy for the human being. This kind of meaningless abundance, which is being driven by Keynesian policymakers trying to raise GDP because the whole world, corporate, sovereign, retail, is running on debt to keep it from collapsing. We might be still staggering forward, but the cost to human health and well-being has been staggering. Abundance has been nothing but an absolute disaster. Human beings need balance, moderation, the via aurea of Aristotle. Not this mad abundance, digital finitude. Digital finitude described in a transparent blockchain which cannot be corrupted, which is transparent and which is the most absolute record of truth in human history, is the only instrument we have which can possibly rectify this solution. And
Okay,
it's an unthinkable one.
To understand, so Bitcoin is scarce. There's up to 21 million.
It's finite.
It's finite. We'll talk about this in a bit, but it's finite. But yeah, it will become scarce over time, right? Once we eventually reach that 21 million, it will become scarcer and scarcer. My question is, this theory that less abundance leads to less societal problems, is there historical proof of this or any other sorts of proofs?
Well, yeah, that is a very controversial one, right? Because that is the irony, by the way. If one looks at classic economics, what the goal was at the time was to achieve as much production as possible. Because by the time classic economics was invented, we humans used to live in the world where having too much was a luxury. And nobody had too much, not even the richest and powerful. And of course, this is why classic economics is engineered towards the idea, produce as much as possible, let the market work its magic, and it will be distributed fairly and squarely, which, by the way, in hindsight, we can say a naive idea, but with the data that they had at their disposal at the time, it looked like a good idea. And in fact, it contributed to economies of scale, which before that have not been possible. And I very much like the observations of Joe on Austrian economics and Keynesians, because Keynesian economics and Austrian economics are economic theories that try to now deal with economies of abundance, which explains why these are theories that try to complement the work conducted by classic economics, because of course abundance was not a thing and classic economics could not take it into account. Now, Joe mentioned that a finite digital asset is the solution to the problem, and for many people that holds true. Of course, there are different outtakes to that as well. I think that a basic, if we were to accept that a finite digital asset is the solution to the problem of abundance, which again, it is a fair way to think about it, that means that in essence, we need to remove a central bank, and we need to take the government completely out of the equation of exercising monetary policy, which again, it is of course a valid proposition, but it requires that we all agree on the role of the government, and not everybody, so to speak, agrees that the government should be completely out of the picture.
But looking at this instead, Jonas,
let me start by saying, because there are 2 points here. One about classical economics, which you need to understand the historical context. Second, about the point about government. Now, one of the biggest lies that the Leviathan of the contemporary state has managed to condition contemporary human beings to believe is that the government is the state. And if you understand the Roman constitution, you realize that not only is this not true, we're talking about a tyrannical state here in which the government is the state. Under the Roman executive, under the Roman system, the Roman government was a one-year executive held in check by the Senate and the people in assembly. It could not make the laws. It had vetoes at all stages. I am not against the state, of course. I think in terms of the state. Ultimately, I am a Roman thinker, if you like. But the idea is to bring the government back to under the check and balance and the division of powers that we had under the Roman state. And under the Roman state, the executive did not have monetary policy in its hands, which is why under the Roman Republic, there was no inflation. Roman coinage remained pure until Augustus took over. When Augustus took over, and there's a very famous paper to show this, inflation starts immediately.
Mhm.
So I am not proposing an anarchist solution. I am not proposing the elimination of the state. You need the state at the very least. I believe in the rule of law, and the law has to come from a source. Cicero defined the state as that group of people who come together to live under their own, within one community and under the laws they set up for themselves. But if you have just one entity setting up law, you don't have a proper republic, you have a tyranny. So again, removing monetary policy from government has about as many negative implications for the state as separating religion from the state.
If I'm understanding Joe, like Jonas' point was that, or rather what I introduced was these two completely different schools of thought. Complete control with with abundance, and then no control where the state loses control with some form
the government.
Indeed, some form of finite or scarcity. But we're often looking at these from, again, extremes. It's either or. Maybe we should be looking at this from the perspective of, we don't need to have a choice on either or. We see which one is working and keep that particular part of the spectrum. So keep the government, like you're saying now, for its certain powers, for certain control, and where it's not working.
Administration, essentially, the role of the government, again, the word minister meant servant. It's no longer a servant. Our ministers draw policy and pass laws. Those are not servants. Those
and
are
they come by once every few years and knock on your door. 5
years, but under the Roman system, 1 year, and they had limitations of term as well. You don't have politicians remaining in government for decades at a time, and then you have an unelected monarchy. So this is your compromise. You keep the state, you remove monetary policy from the hands of the state, of the government, or at least separating the legislative from the policy making and the administration and the implementation.
And Bitcoin can do that.
Of course, Bitcoin can do that, because the minute that a centralized entity loses its power to coerce money out of the hands of the people, and it has to really start offering beneficial goods and services to the people. It has to act honestly instead of thieving, robbing, and murdering in numerous ways.
Now, there's a question, and it's actually something that I often toy with. Let's say that we go to this extreme and we say we're replacing the monetary system with Bitcoin, just like we've done in the past with gold. And let's say we have the Bitcoin standard rather than we had the gold standard. There's a question, and I often ask this is, could the CBDC eventually get in the way of this standard?
If I might on that one, if I might, on that question.
Indeed. Could they get control of enough Bitcoin and remove the Bitcoin standard and go back to a fiat system built on Bitcoin?
There are, I like that we reached this point of the discussion. It came right after Joe's important comment on monetary policy and who should control it. Let us first start by accepting that Bitcoin maximalists make a fair point, that the authorities that have been trusted with the power to exercise monetary policy and economic policy are being misusing it. And we all agree on that. I don't think that there would be anybody who would question that. Of course, whether replacing them completely with a digital ledger system, that is open to debate, and of course we can discuss that. I can tell you for a fact that because coming now to the central bank digital currency, that it seems like many economists are very in favor of that idea of a central bank digital currency. And by the way, if you ask economists, can Bitcoin compete with a central bank digital currency? And can it make it less attractive? An economist would tell you for sure that in order to compete with the central bank digital currency, Bitcoin has a severe limitation. And it's exactly the fact that it's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins in circulation. Why? Because if the government can issue as many digital tokens as they want, by definition, they create a much larger market than Bitcoin can create. And in fact, this is why economists sometimes nowadays say that this is why Bitcoin is not so noticeable microeconomically nowadays. Now, of course, while economists might be attracted to the idea of a central bank digital currency, it comes with certain characteristics that might be alarming. I mean, for example, with Bitcoin, there is a certain level of user pseudonymity or anonymity in certain cases. With central bank digital currencies, that will be very difficult to achieve. And while for a government that might come with the extra benefit that it will be able to monitor all kinds of payments and transactions, I'm not pretty much certain that the users would be very receptive to that idea. And Joshua, mark the moment that I say something which is privacy defending, because usually I'm the one who goes against privacy, the GDPR and the SATs, but I do understand the caveats.
Yeah, and indeed, like looking at the privacy perspective, Bitcoin is completely open. Most cryptos are completely open. The whole public can see them. So there is indeed some privacy concerns there. What's interesting is, as a people, do we trust the public more to have this access to our history of transactions rather than certain powers? And these certain powers can either be governments or they can be big tech. And do we trust any of these more than we trust our neighbors to have some form of visibility on what we're doing? Who knows? So there is a question, and I think we can go through maybe a few questions before we go on. So there's one question asking, so recently there's been some AML laws that have capped cryptocurrency transactions at 1,000 euros, meaning anything under 1,000, you can just undertake that transaction. Anything over, the merchant should be asking you questions about AML. And then it's 1,000 euros, sorry, it's 7,000 euros for cash. Is this leading us towards a cashless society? I mean, we're being incentivized now with this to use more cash if we're trying to hide, right? I don't think we're trying to hide anything. Or are they incentivizing us to use their system where there are no AML procedures on certain transactions?
That's an interesting one, by the way, right? Because it kind of allows me to remind everybody that next Thursday, we're going to talk about MiCA. And the law that is being mentioned here is a law, it's a European regulation that is trying to complement MiCA. In fact, is the systematic effort of the European institutions to regulate the crypto space. And it is an imperative, so to speak, addition to the MiCA regime, without which I don't know whether MiCA would even make sense, because a short sneak preview for next week, MiCA mostly regulates crypto service providers, doesn't really regulate assets that much. And indeed, there is the upcoming transfer of funds regulation that will hopefully come together with MiCA into force, which indeed says that for crypto transactions that are above 1,000 euros, crypto asset service providers will have to conduct all kinds of know your customer and AML duties. In essence, it means that they need to have full knowledge about where did you get that crypto asset from and why do you want to send it over.
And why is, like, what really I wonder is, why is the crypto limit lower than the cash limit? But we're talking about why Bitcoin. Now, this shows us these sort of rules that are being imposed. This shows us the power that the existing system gives to our states.
Although, Joshua, I think we would agree that this is not possible if we talk about centralized exchanges or crypto asset service providers. Indeed. I'm not sure that such a system can be implemented if we move into the decentralized crypto service provider sphere, in which case, you know.
The thing is, you always have to connect to the real world, but let's bring it back. Can Bitcoin fix this? Why Bitcoin?
I want to draw a distinction between digital cash and digital fiat. And I start with the comments that Johannes made about those economists who said that Bitcoin cannot scale because you cannot print more. That's exactly why Bitcoin, in an extremely important book on the disaster that happened in Germany after World War I, a German banker, Argentarius, had this to say: the problem is not how few units of currency there are. The problem is always how many. Once you start to increase the number, then you are diluting the value that is stored in the amount of units. We can always subdivide units. And with Bitcoin, a finite number can be subdivided to infinity, which means although people have trouble, they say, but no, it's not inflationary. If I have €1 and I can divide it into a million parts, then you enable microtransactions, but you are not inflating. So those people are arguing, and when they're saying that CBDs, the advantage of CBDs is essentially you can increase them, they're simply telling you, we're going to keep robbing you. We're going to keep going straight to hyperinflation, which has always led to the destruction of historical epochs, states, and has led to war and atrocities. If you want to know what hyperinflation looks like, go to Zimbabwe or go to Venezuela, or look at your history books and look at what happened in Germany. I will say this: the Germans tried to solve the problem of hyperinflation through a strong government. That strong government used a type of fiat currency, essentially a voucher for industry workers to arm. But then, because it had hid its economic activities under this fake form of activity, it found that it had run out of the foreign exchanges it needed to keep up with its foreign trade, leading to virtually a necessity to go to war. Hyperinflation has always led to unbelievable human misery. And CBDs, the argument that CBDs will allow more and more printing is simply emphasizing this, not to mention that there are other horrors to CBDs. We are talking about programmable money, conditional money. Is there anyone who wants to use a monetary token which is tied to your behavior? You can only buy so much of such a thing. You can only buy such a thing and not another. If you have expressed these ideas, then no, you cannot use your money this month.
I mean,
we can print you out of your wallet. This is what we're talking about, CBDCs.
Really, no, they could control that now, right, Joe? I mean, yes, a lot of our transactions are digital.
Yes, because cash is exactly like that. I mean, CBDCs is in fact a scam because we already have CBDCs.
Exactly.
But the thing is this: people will always turn to the kind of monetary unit which enables them to survive in an environment in which it is possible to maintain a standard of living, because the government, if you open your mouth, if you express an opinion, if you prefer one product over another, you're being shut out of the system, then you are going to turn to some kind of other monetary system which cannot be controlled. In the past, it was in Weimar, Germany, they used pieces of jewelry, pieces of furniture, art, whatever they could. It's a very different thing. We're trying to control a digital finite cash system, which you cannot stop, which doesn't even need the internet. You can transfer it over radio, for example, which is hidden, which can be hidden using Tor over VPN. Yeah, I mean, you can crack 1 or 2 nodes on Tor and VPN, but if there are 1 million nodes, who has the assets to crack that system? Completely different.
But so I think the thing that we want to ensure is that we keep control of our cash. Now, whether it's cash, whether it's a digital asset, we want the ability that no one can ever intervene and stop us from using it for our livelihood. And the main difference that I see is that if we look at cash or even gold, they can come to your house and confiscate it. Now, I guess Bitcoin, it's a bit harder for them to, right? Because they have to actually get your private key, your key phrase, you could memorize it. But even there, they could do enough force to get it from you. So I guess one principle we need to keep in mind is this self-sovereign ability to have some form of value that we can spend and trade. And the other one is their rules that they want to impose over this. How many rules should we allow for them to impose over it? And are these rules always bad? I mean, it does come from a good place, right? If we think about anti-money laundering and funding of terrorism, it comes from a good place.
I disagree.
So no, so Joe, what I'm saying is,
I disagree, and I will say why.
so let me just
What is the
say,
definition of corruption? What is the definition
let me
of
just
corruption?
say, it comes from a good place in the sense that if we could put in a mechanism to stop terrorism and money laundering, that I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It's the corruption of the system. It's the fact that the system is not even finding any terrorism and it's only imposing stuff on this. But the principle from a good place
is too high. Our pensioners are struggling, and our pensioners are not.
Indeed, Joe, but I don't think we disagree that the principle comes from a good place.
I disagree, and let me explain why. In the first place, who commits corruption? The people who commit corruption are the office holders, politicians, judges.
Joe, I completely agree there, but the principle of stopping terrorism, Joe, is what I'm talking about.
Why don't we regulate? Yes, but even so, I mean, who is sending $1 million to terrorists? You or I, or my aged mother?
No. Indeed.
Who is enabling these transactions?
So I think we agree in principle that the implementation is bad, but the design, the principle, Joe, we can't argue that stopping funding of terrorism and money laundering is a bad thing, right? As a principle, it would be great if we could do it. The thing is, it's not working.
Again, I'm skeptical. You see,
I'm not talking, Joe. I'm not talking about the implementation as a principle.
What stops a state designating?
I'm not talking about the implementation. I'm talking if we had magic to stop funding of terrorism, wouldn't that be great?
But isn't that a hypothetical too far?
But remember, we're talking about principles, Joe.
What if we choose another example? Because that might be a little polarizing because it involves the government. Let's say that somebody hacks my wallet, private person, not the government. Somebody hacks my wallet. I have 200 Bitcoin. If only I had 200 Bitcoin in my wallet, in any case, and somebody hacks it, right? Should we allow the government to devise rules on what happens in this case? Have I lost my Bitcoin? Should the hacker keep it? Or should the government come up with another system that says that I might be able to claim it back?
That's a tough one.
Right? The thing is, it's a tough one in the sense that I know it's difficult to implement, right?
The thing is, governments increase power by creep. Big organizations have only one interest, self-perpetuation. They can designate any activity as a terrorist activity or a crime. They might designate freedom fighters, people who have a moral claim to rise against whoever is ruling them. By the very idea of terrorism simply means that government can acquire enough support globally to designate legitimate revolutionaries and rebels as terrorists.
Okay, let's talk just about a random crazy person killing people, Joe.
But it's a very different thing. You cannot.
But this is why we put into place laws, Joe, to stop bad things. Now, indeed, bad is subjective to the people we put in power. And
again, in fact, I think we have a very nice question on that, Joshua. I think somebody, in fact, is asking us the control of people by those in power who were appointed, not voted in by the people. They are planning a social credit system. If this is done, one will not be able to buy and sell if one does not go along with it. And of course, yeah, as you were trying to explain, and the problem is the people that have not even been elected, but have been appointed by a government to form a policy, like a social credit process. So do we accept their arbitrary standards on whether we can get a loan or not? That is indeed a very fair question.
I am fundamentally hostile to the whole concept of positive law. Now, positive, the idea of positive, most people think that positive law means good law. It's actually a Latin word, pono, meaning laying down, which is the main philosophical underpinning of contemporary law.
Can you
Law
explain
is
to our
what-
audience, Joe, what is positive law?
Yes, so the idea, people seem to think that positive law means good law, but positive law is in contradiction to natural law, which posits an absolute standard, which is essentially right reason congruent with nature. Positive law comes from the Latin word pono, to place, to impose, and therefore positive law is what the current authority deems as law. And in Latin, we have the phrase quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who will watch the watchmen themselves? Can be applied to law. Who is going to control? Who is going to legislate, regulate regulators themselves?
Ultimately, the people, I guess, right? That's the argument.
Yeah, the people. But if we keep allowing this regulatory creep to go on, there will come a time when the people are wrapped in a technological nightmare they cannot break out of.
Mhm.
And that is why I keep repeating, this is the reason for Bitcoin. It gives us hope against the continuous power creep of big organizations, by which I don't necessarily mean governments, but even big corporations who are collaborators of government for their own reasons, whatever.
So can Bitcoin provide some solution to an impending social credit system, CBD system?
Yes, I believe that historical precedent shows that when the current legal currency standard becomes untenable, for whatever reason, people will turn to whatever works.
And this works in what sense? Like Bitcoin works, we know.
Yes.
Bitcoin hasn't
I
stopped.
mean, again, you say the government can coerce Bitcoin out of you. Really, it might coerce one or two people. But if say 500 Bitcoin owners say no, you're not going to get it, what are they going to do? They're going to put them all to prison, which costs money. You're going to shoot them, but the police, soldiers themselves might have stake, might own Bitcoin in one way or another. There's a limit to how much you can disgorge an undisgorgeable digital unit.
But then I come again to the question, over time, could we end up with a fiat system built on Bitcoin?
Okay, yes and no. Technically, it was possible in the same way that the first banks in Italy were gold-based, but then they started to issue credit notes. But the beauty of Bitcoin is this: with an open, transparent ledger. Now, you know that I am a hardcore privacy advocate, and for a time, I was a Monero maxi until I realized that an extremely valuable property of Bitcoin is it is absolute transparent truth. That there will never be any doubt about Bitcoin. You can have peace of mind with Bitcoin.
Yes, but okay, so we can still build a fiat system on Bitcoin. It's just that we know what they're doing ultimately
Yes,
with reserves.
we know. So we know who's fractionalizing Bitcoin.
And how are they
again, Bitcoin is a technology which allows self-custody. So we don't need the excuse that we need somewhere to keep it safe, or we don't need the excuse that we need multiple supply chains to transfer $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, as we would if we had to transfer $100,000 worth of gold.
Okay, so it seems like Bitcoin can provide some solution. It's not going to solve everything on its own, but given the transparency that it brings, it might allow for us to build other mechanisms around.
Oh, and I'll throw this your way.
Pardon?
And I'll throw this your way. Here's a bit for you to think about: AI. Bitcoin, I believe, can possibly make AI safer without regulating AI. How come? Because AI will have to compete for an extremely finite resource, and people will not disgorge a finite resource until they are receiving truly economically beneficial goods and services.
Let's have another webinar on blockchain, Bitcoin, and AI, because I think this is one where we can talk for our
It's something for you to think about.
I think about it and I don't think that it will help much. And the reason is that AI computing lives outside the blockchain, and we don't need Bitcoin to run it.
But it will need a currency unit if it needs to upgrade itself, influence the external world, and so on.
And we have currency already for that. And the powers that it's a question of, do we use Bitcoin outside as a main means or not? Because if we're not using Bitcoin, then Bitcoin is useless to AI.
AI can perhaps set up a printing facility and print infinite amounts of fiat.
Indeed, but let's come back
to that with Bitcoin.
Indeed.
That's something to think about.
So there is a question on, does Bitcoin create a small group of controlling people?
So now the answer is, so far, Bitcoin has been relatively concentrated, which is why I, for one, am very happy when Bitcoin crashes.
Concentrated in terms of what? In terms of ownership?
Yes, in terms of ownership, because obviously it has privileged the early adopters for obvious reasons. Now, it's very different from the way that fiat privileges people close to centers of power, because the early adopters took a huge risk. And more recent huge accumulators like Michael Saylor, who bought 100,000 at an average price of 30,000, has taken an even bigger risk. So at least they have some merit, unlike those who have benefited from fiat money. But still, I love it when Bitcoin crashes and it is distributed. So these crashes, they have a self-regulating market system which distributes more and more over time.
But really, the only thing that's crashing is the value of how much fiat we are willing to pay for Bitcoin. These individuals who hold a lot of Bitcoin can control that value, but they're not controlling Bitcoin.
But a lot of true. They do not control the system. But I assume the question to me means that will there be a small group of super rich people? As Bitcoin over time gets more and more distributed, and it becomes more equitable. In terms of the network, no. The network is affected by the number of nodes that are running, with each node having a vote. Now anybody can install a node. It's very easy, and I'm on record offering anyone who wants my help to easily install a node, and I'm happy to help them to do it free of charge.
Actually, I mean, there is a question of what happens if a particular individual or group of individuals acquire a lot of computational power, a lot of nodes, and control the network. We definitely don't have time to discuss this in the next 8 minutes.
Too expensive. It hasn't been done so far in the weakest speeds. Now it's becoming, with every day that passes, it becomes too expensive for even the biggest entities.
And I have some other theories that even when people start to say, what happens if country X has so much, we know they have so much power. What happens now if they try to create their own network? I have some theories about why it's even harder, and we'll discuss that in another.
So if I may, one question. Next to what you mentioned about if one concentrates a lot of computational power, because then of course they would be able to even control the consensus mechanism, right? It's proof of work and it depends on power, isn't it?
So they can control the consensus mechanism to a certain extent. The thing is, cryptography cannot be broken. No one can ever spend your money. If we manage to break that, don't worry about Bitcoin. Worry about every banking system we have.
I have another one. Sorry.
Yep.
Have we ever witnessed any fork on the Bitcoin blockchain?
So yes, a number.
Indeed, and we could do a
number. They've all gone to zero.
Indeed.
But the question is, if there are forks, it means that there is a majority of nodes that believes in a certain direction.
No, it doesn't mean that.
No, not a majority. We could do one right now, just me and you. We could say, you know what, we disagree. Let's create our own fork. Excellent. But no one cares about our fork.
What about Bitcoin Cash?
We can create Bitcoin Cash Ionis.
Sorry?
We can create Bitcoin Ionis right now.
No, but what was the reason behind the Bitcoin Cash fork?
I don't remember. Joe, do you remember?
Infrastructural, big blocks.
Block size,
yeah, they were debating on the size of the blocks, which means that somebody within the network had the power to steer towards the direction of keeping the blocks at the same size, right?
We can do that right now, Ionis. Right now, we can create a Bitcoin fork that for every single block found gives Ionis 0.1 Bitcoin. That sounds like a great idea, right, to you? And we can do it right now, but no one's going to use it.
And the
So it
people
doesn't
will
need majority.
decide ultimately. It's a market thing.
Indeed.
But people will always go for where there is the greatest concentrated value and security.
I would hope so. I used to not believe in people as such. I have
You
more
believe in self-interest, rational self-interest.
indeed.
It's a very different matter.
Indeed. Excellent. So we only have a few minutes left more. So someone asks, what about quantum computing? And okay, let's assume that a quantum computer can break cryptography. There are some types of cryptography we know it will break. I wouldn't be worrying about Bitcoin or any other blockchain. Like I would if it breaks cryptography, but every other system we have will be broken. And they're much quicker to break because it's a single node rather than a consensus of nodes.
And we can always fork to a quantum resistant
Indeed.
Consensus mechanism.
Indeed. So there's a lot of research out there on quantum resistant encryption, and we'll have to, just like every other system, upgrade to quantum resistant encryption. So the short answer is quantum computing will break some types of encryption, but that's going to break all systems we know. But all systems we know run on a single machine and are very easy to take over, are very easy to change their whole history, all the data they have. A machine that we have like Bitcoin that is replicated around the world on tens of thousands of computers is going to be much harder to change all of them at the same time. But again, we'll come into this discussion on the proof of work webinar, which we'll host soon. Next week, we will be hosting a webinar on From Blockchain Islands to Mika with Love. And it's all about the European regulation. And we came up with this sort of discussion because we have been noticing a lot of similarities to what was done in Malta with this European regulation. And we'll be discussing certain similarities and also how these similarities could affect the local scene and the international scene. This will be on regulation, something which a lot of Bitcoiners will say we don't need, I guess, for crypto. And my short answer to that is we're not actually regulating Bitcoin or crypto. We're regulating centralized entities like banks, except they're just dealing with crypto. That's the only difference. Before we head off, any last comments, Joe, Ioannis?
Joe, please go ahead. And
very simple. I have said it many times. Bitcoin is the biggest paradigm in history, defining history as the record of human activities since the invention of writing.
Ioannis?
For me, to anybody who thinks that Bitcoin is just a fad and that it will disappear, they might probably want to reconsider. I think we are past that point. I believe that it has made a point, and that point is that digital communities do have the power to create their own digital currencies or payment systems. And if we want to make the maximum out of it, we better embrace that instead of arguing whether we need to stop it or not. On that note, I think these are ideas, Joshua, that we discussed quite a lot at the Center for Distributed Ledger Technologies. So I believe that it would be great if people would like to keep up with us, because we're going to be doing that in all of our next events, including both our summer school and our masters, right?
Indeed, indeed. So from my point of view, Bitcoin works. One Bitcoin is always going to be equal to one Bitcoin. And I do believe that it's reached a stage now of not mass adoption yet, but a stage that I do not ever see it going back in terms of adoption. When there's crashes, they don't affect me in the least. They do affect me because I always say I wish I had more money to buy more at this point. When they go up, well, I expect it to go up. And it's just a matter of living off that amount of exchange that I can for the meantime until Bitcoin does. I believe, this is not financial advice, take your own risk, but I believe Bitcoin at some point will be worth a lot more than it is right now. But that is, for me, that is gambling against the fiat system. That's all.
And not investment advice, right?
Definitely not.
Thanks, just everyone. Saving advice. Very different.
Thanks, everyone. Wishing you a good
bye. Have a nice
day, afternoon.
Bye.
And we'll be in touch soon.